Hello, welcome back to Light of the Logos. This is Cameron. Today I'm going to be looking at this Greek Mosaic tile that was found in Israel in 2005. It was discovered beneath a prison called the Megiddo prison, and it's one of the earliest archaeological findings which gives a reference to the deity of Christ. It literally says in the Greek, God, Jesus Christ. So things like this just absolutely enthrall me, absolutely excite me. Israel is just so rich with Jewish and Christian ancient history. So basically just anywhere you walk or look, there is just incredible richness and depth and history there everywhere that you go. And such as was the case underneath this old prison. They discovered that there was an old ancient church underneath this prison. And so now, instead of rebuilding on top of this area, they are going to keep excavating it, and they're going to protect it and preserve it. What's amazing to me about this is this goes back to ancient times to around 230 AD. But one of the things that I've heard over the years, things like the Da Vinci Code, or even speaking with Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses, or anyone who does not hold to the deity of Christ, anyone whose theology does not hold to the deity of Christ, they make the claim that the doctrine of the deity of Christ was somehow an invention of Constantine. You know, there might even be people on Joe Rogan's podcast who have made these types of crazy claims.
Well, the New Testament was made by Constantine.
But those people don't ever get fact-checked, you know. Those people don't ever get scrutinized. They just are free to say all the kind of ahistorical crazy things that they want to say, and they get a free pass. Well, I'm sick of free passes, okay? So we're going to look at how this is just an incredible find because it goes against what is the common narrative. The common narrative is that Constantine invented the deity of Christ, or Constantine had all the scriptures and was able to change them. Absolute nonsense, absolute fairy tales, absolute myths. Or that the deity of Christ or the doctrine of the Trinity wasn't somehow formulated until the councils in the 4th century, with the Council of Nicaea. Dan Brown states in the Da Vinci Code, Jesus was viewed by his followers as a mortal prophet, a great and powerful man, but a man nonetheless. A mortal, Jesus' establishment as the Son of God was officially proposed and voted on by the Council of Nicaea. By officially endorsing Jesus as the Son of God, Constantine turned Jesus into a deity who existed beyond the scope of the human world, an entity whose power was unchallengeable. Page 233. Dan Brown further writes, Constantine upgraded Jesus' status almost 4 centuries after Jesus' death. Constantine commissioned and financed a new Bible, which omitted those Gospels that spoke of Christ's human traits and embellished those Gospels that made him godlike. Page 234.
And that was the first time I'm like, oh my God, that's right, Constantine. Oh my God, that he's the one that created the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. And they're the ones that sat down and like, okay, let's argue about what really Jesus is. And so they basically built up the mythology in the Council of Nicaea, right?
Yes. The Council of Nicaea came together, built up the mythology. They added to the story. They took from a lot of ancient texts and tablets, and then they kind of curated this book, which they want to call a canonized Bible.
So this actually is just a bombshell. This is a bombshell that just completely dissolves and blows up all of these ridiculous myths that have been circulating for years and years and years. Because this archaeological finding goes all the way back to 230 AD, which means it predates Constantine. It predates when Constantine was even alive. It definitely predates the Council of Nicaea. Not only is it a bombshell to all these ridiculous myths that are thrown out there and believed, just embracing, just understanding the truth of it, which is that the early Christians believed and embraced, wholeheartedly embraced the same doctrine that Christ and the apostles taught. So let's go ahead and look at this incredible mosaic, and I'm going to translate it and talk about it. All right, so give me a second. So this is the Greek mosaic. All right, I'm going to go ahead and read this. So this says, all right, here we have prosyneken, ekeptus, I philotheos, tin trapesan, Theo, Iesu, Christos, mnemosynon. Prosyneken, ekeptus, I philotheos, tin trapesan, Theo, Iesu Christo, mnemosynon. All right, so let's go ahead and translate this here. What is this saying? I'm going to do it kind of in the more of the English word order. Here we have E, which is the. Here's philo, for love, like where we get Philadelphia, brotherly love. All right, so E, philo. This is theos. All right, so we have the God loving. And then the person's name must have been probably a wealthy lady who was able to provide all this and donate this. So they believe this was like in a prayer house because this was in, I believe, what would have looked like a sacred room. And this would have been like the centerpiece where I believe a table would have went. This would have probably been a location during a church service or a prayer house where they would have taken the Eucharist or communion. So it says the God-loving, but then it's going to refer to the lady who actually donated this or provided it, this is her name on the second line, Akeptus. So it's saying the God-loving Akeptus. And I'm just going to write out the English transliteration. And then the word offering. I couldn't find an actual Greek word in the lexicon that was an exact translation of this, but I found a word that was extremely similar, which meant the same thing, to offer an offering or a gift. Prosinikin. So we have the God-loving Akeptus has offered the table. So tin, which is the, trapesan, the table. The God-loving Akeptus has offered the table. And here we have God, Jesus Christ. Now, these are all abbreviated with the first and the last letter of these words, with a line written over the top of them. This is called the nomina sacra, where they shorten these sacred names of God, and they'll use the first letter and the last letter of the Greek word to consolidate it. So this right here, we have theta and omega. So this would actually, if it was written out fully, Theo. Here, if we have Iesu, iota, eta, sigma, omicron, epsilon, Iesu. All right, so, and then here we have Christo, would be chi, rho, iota, sigma, tau, omega. All right, so here, the first and last letter, we would have theta, omega, with a line over it, which means God. Here we would have iota and epsilon, which means Yesu. And then Christo, we have chi, omega, with the line over it. So, Theo, Yesu, Christo. So, the God-loving Akeptus has offered the table for God, Jesus Christ, Nimosinon, as a remembrance or as a memorial, as a memorial. Okay. So we've got prosiniken, Akeptus, philo, theos, tin, trapezon, theo, Iesu, Christo, Mnemosinon. The God-loving Akeptus has offered the table for God, Jesus Christ, as a memorial. There you go. We've translated this Greek ancient tile, Mosaic, that goes back almost 2,000 years. all the way back to 230 AD. Absolutely staggering. This stuff is just so cool. This is just so amazing to me. It feels amazing just to know basic Greek, to even be able to translate this and read this in the original language is just such a privilege, such an honor. It's so amazing. It's so beautiful that we can see this, find these things, and have just this incredible assurance that the Christian faith is connected to real things. It's connected to real people. It's connected to real history. That we see that this was the same faith that wasn't made up with Constantine. This was not something that was made up at the Council of Nicaea. This predates all of that. The deity of Christ was cherished and believed and held dear by the early church, by those with little and even those who could afford to provide and have a church like this built in those times, as this Lady Akeptus was able to do. What an amazing thing that almost 2,000 years later we're able to observe. I mean, this just crystallizes my faith. And this should crystallize every Christian's faith in the world, to see these things, to know that these things exist. And it's not just this. We have ancient textual evidence that backs up the deity of Christ as well. I mean, hence the New Testament. We have the early church writings. I mean, this just flies in the face of those who are antichrist. This flies in the face of those who just cannot stand, who cannot stomach the notion, the idea that Christ is divine, uniquely divine, supremely divine, the creator of all things, the ultimate creator of all things, the eternal Logos. So we need to remind ourselves of how this is something that is throughout the Tanakh and the New Testament when it comes to understanding the Son of God, when it comes to understanding the Messiah, when it comes to understanding the Lord Jesus Christ. And that God in his nature is simultaneously two things. Yahweh is both preeminent and eminent. He is beyond all things. He is the one supreme being who creates all things, but he is also eminent, and that he enters into his own creation out of humility and interacts with his creation, as we see in the Old Testament. But then in an even more incomprehensible way, we see him interacting with his people in the New Testament and taking on flesh, being birthed through his holy people, being birthed through the Israelites, through the line of David, coming from the patriarchs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to be the one, as it was foretold in Genesis, that he would someday, there would be a son who would crush the head of the snake. That snake would bite his heel, it would take a parting shot at him, but nevertheless, the Son of God would be the one who's victorious. And as the Son of God, he is both divine and human, but also he is now the Son of Man, and he sits at the right hand of God because he is also God. And he has been given all divine prerogative to judge the living and the dead. This is the God of the Bible. This is Yahweh. This is the Messiah. This is the Lord Jesus Christ. Let us remind ourselves that, again, from the very first verse of the Bible, the very first verse of the Tanakh, which says that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Yahweh created the heavens and the earth. God is preeminent. But what do we also see in Genesis 3:8? We see that God also walks in the garden with his people. He comes to them out of their despair. He comes to them because they cannot come to him. He approaches us. He draws near to us. He is Emmanuel, God with us. He is the light of the world who has entered into darkness and is now the light who has given light to all men, to all people. So if you can see his light, if you can hear his message, if you can see the truths of who the real Messiah is, of who the true eternal God is, who is both preeminent and eminent, then there is hope for salvation and there is hope for eternity in knowing this God, who is the creator of all things. And he has revealed himself as he has approached us, and he has revealed that he is the Lord Jesus Christ, someone who was tangible, someone who has offered us a faith that is tangible, someone who has offered us a faith that the earliest believers believed the same thing. And it wasn't invented. in the 4th century, like so many try to claim that it was. No, these amazing truths go back to the Tanakh themselves. They go back to Christ and the apostles, and they go back to the earliest of believers who were faithful and held these truths about Christ dearly to their hearts. So we should hold them dearly to our hearts as well. That's all I have to say right now. Thank you guys so much for watching this video and looking into this incredible archaeological finding of this mosaic. May God bless you. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.